The World Bank sees Mauritius at a crossroads as it releases report on earnings mobility and the inequality of opportunity in the labor market, while the gap in earnings between high and low-skilled workers is still a concern. The World Bank believes that bold measures taken recently will produce positive results. Those measures include the introduction of a minimum wage policy and the negative income tax. In this edition of Business Connect, we talk to Marco Ranzani, economist at the World Bank and main author of the report.
Mr. Marco Ranzani, you're economist from the World Bank and responsible also for poverty and inequality in the islands, Mauritius, and other islands also in the Indian Ocean. And you're presenting a report on earnings mobility and inequality of opportunity in labor markets. And what do we understand by this?
When you think about mobility in earnings, is someone that moves from making less money at one point in time to making much more money at 1 year later or 2 years later, 3 years later. Or the other way around, someone that starts very high and ends up making a little bit less money. The way we define earnings mobility in this report is in two ways. The first one is by looking at earnings level. So let's say a worker that makes X rupees per month in 2010, and we follow that workers over time for about a year, and then we observe how much he's making after a period of about a year. So the first definition of earnings mobility is the change in the level of earnings. So from 1,000 rupees to, let's say, 2,000 rupees. The second way is by looking at changes in earnings. What I mean by changes in earnings is simply the percentage change in the earnings level. So if one goes from 1,000 to 2,000, then it's 100% change in earnings. So that's the second way. And the reason we do that is because in many countries what is found is that there is no convergence, there is no convergence in earnings level, meaning that people that start low do not necessarily converge to the same level of workers that starts high, but sometimes, and it's very much more common, we observe convergence in changes, meaning that people that start at the bottom experience larger percentage change in earnings compared to people that start at the top. So that is our definition of mobility in the report. As to inequality of opportunity, it's very different from the standard concept of inequality. When we talk about inequality, it's inequality in income, inequality in consumption, and that's an outcome. It's an outcome of the process. I work, I get an income, and if I measure inequality in that income, that's an inequality in outcomes. But it's also important, and I think many people, regardless of political, ideological preferences, would agree that leveling the playing field for everyone is something that every country, every society should aim for. And that's what we mean by inequality of opportunity, meaning that everyone should have access to jobs regardless of where it's coming from, of its origin, of their characteristics. So that's what we mean by inequality of opportunity in the labor market. And we actually look in the report at three outcomes. One is simply employment. The second outcome is full-time employment, and we define it according to a threshold of 40 hours per week. And then wage employment, meaning working for someone else for a wage, as opposed, for example, to be a self-employed, working for yourself in your own business.
Now, you're presenting this report, and what have you seen in the findings of this report from Mauritius in this field?
Yes. What we find is that actually, I should probably mention that we use data from Statistics Mauritius, the official statistical office in charge of statistical production in the country, and we use labor force survey data. So what we find using this data is that there is convergence in earnings changes. So this looks complicated, but it's very simple. Over this period of 16 months, we look at people that start making less money, so they are what we call in economics, they are at the bottom of the distribution, they are like the 10% of the distribution. So these people, these workers manage to experience a percentage change in earnings that is much higher than those that start at the top. And the number we have is about 24% percent change in earnings at the bottom versus a small decline at the top over a period of 16 months. Then what happens over a period of 2-3 years is, we cannot say, but there is, in the short run, there is convergence in earnings. This is good news because there is upward mobility. The less good news is that there are some specific individual characteristics, and I would mention two, which is gender and education. Foster or hinder earnings mobility, meaning being a woman comes with a penalty. So they not only start low with lower earnings level, but they also have more difficulty in catching up with high-paid workers. And the same is true for low-educated people. So low-educated workers, they face more difficulty in catching up with high-paid workers. So what we get out of this analysis is that these two characteristics are crucial, not just to start and earning good money on the market, but also to move up the income ladder over time.
So, World Bank does many reports in various fields around the world. Now for Mauritius, what's the relevance of this report?
The Mauritian economy has transformed over time. The economy has moved from agriculture into manufacturing, textile, and now is more and more into services. For example, financial services, real estate, professional activities. There are many accountants, for example. And this requires a different skill set, right? And as the economy moves towards these kind of activities, there is need for a certain type of labor supply, of working people with a certain set of skills. But the increase in the demand was so high, so fast, that supply couldn't catch up. This has brought about a divergence, and that means that more high-skilled workers are needed, and that's why their wages have been increasing much faster compared to people with low-skilled. And that's where this inequality in earnings is coming from.
Now, after the recommendations, how to put into practice the recommendations here in Mauritius?
I think Mauritius is now at a crossroad. Mauritius is now an upper middle income country. The government is committed to take Mauritius to the next level, to become a high income country by 2030. And in order to do that, some of these issues needs to be addressed. Bringing more women into the labor market will help increasing productivity. Also addressing youth unemployment. And when it comes to youth unemployment, I believe there are two issues, the low-skilled and the high-skilled. The low-skilled unemployed are people that, according to surveys that have been done by the Human Resource Development Council in Mauritius, that is in charge of skill planning, many times these young people have the opportunities to find a job out there, but the problem is that the job that they are available to them because they have low skilled are not the jobs they would like to take up. And of course, this is a country with a very generous welfare state. So if they don't work, that means also they can afford not to work because they have something to put on the table at the end of the day anyway, regardless, right? So I believe on one hand, we need to try to activate, engage these young people, low-skilled. And there are interventions. There is a new field of economics at the intersection between psychology and economics. It's called behavioral economics. And this is about addressing soft skills. So not just about having a certificate, having a diploma, but it's about being able to be part of a team, being able to show up on time at work, being able to keep that work for a long time, because what happens is that most of these unemployed are not unemployed for a long time. That means they find a job, then they quit or they're fired, depends. Maybe the contract is over because it was a temporary contract. But most of the times, I think by choice, they quit their job. So it's about building this feeling of engagement, of participation. And there are interventions that we hope we can take up with the government and Mauritian counterparts going forward. inequality in access to labor market opportunities in Mauritius has been going down over the past decade. So that's good news.
The Tertiary Education Commission, regulatory body for tertiary education in Mauritius, wants to ensure that Mauritius achieves its objective to become a knowledge hub by delivering high-quality education. As more tertiary institutions are setting up campuses in Mauritius, we see how tertiary education is evolving and how free tertiary education will impact the socio-economic life of the country.
Mr. Nair, thank you very much for giving us a few minutes of your time. What is the current state of tertiary education in Mauritius? Share with us the number of universities, the number of students that are studying in Mauritius.
Right. Currently, there are about 55 tertiary providers in Mauritius, 10 public institutions and 45 private providers. There are around 48,000 students in the sector itself. If you look at it in terms of how it's broken down, there are about 22,000 in public institutions and 17,000 in private, and the remaining 9,000 studying overseas. This numbers that I've just given you includes 2,100 international students. 60% of these students are studying full-time, and the demographics also show us about 58% of them are female students in the sector. 30% of the total enrollments are actually new admissions itself. And a number of the universities that are actually present in our sector are internationally renowned. For example, Curtin University. That's the biggest private provider in Mauritius at the current moment.
We used to have only one university in the country, and now this industry has boomed. What do you think is happening, and where is Mauritius heading now?
You're right, actually. I mean, in 1965, there was one institution. Now, if you look at the time span, we have actually expanded. In 2017, there was a total of 55 educational providers. We have come down to 45 educational providers in terms of private providers and 10 public institutions. We have increased, and now there's a reason for this increase. We have moved in a different direction, but let me put it in more practical terms. We have Mauritians who actually have a craving to study. If they want to crave study, must provide the environment for them to study. It's expensive to go overseas. I come from Australia. To go to Australia, it costs roughly between 30,000 to 40,000 Australian dollars to study. We are providing those opportunities to Mauritians to study here. So if you're going to actually provide those opportunities, we must provide an environment for those students to come in and study here for internationally recognized degrees. Also, there's a demand in the region, especially in this African subcontinent. If we can actually increase our delivery of courses and the diversity of courses, we are able to attract these students into Mauritius.
What is the role and responsibility of the Tertiary Education Commission in terms of quality insurance for the tertiary education sector?
We take quality very seriously. The Tertiary Education Commission is empowered to ensure that we enforce quality in all institutions. Now, the way we do that is clearly where all private providers register with us. Now, I actually provided earlier an example where we had 55 private providers earlier. We are right down to 45. Basically, what we are trying to do is to make sure there is a standard there. If you do not meet the standard, you do not provide those services in this country itself. So Tertiary Education Commission looks at accreditation, looks at quality audits. But we are moving in a different direction. The birth of the Quality Assurance Agency and the Higher Education Commission will actually take place in 2019. What this does is actually reinforces and solidifies the quality agenda. The QAA, the Quality Assurance Authority, will take over the audit process, and that audit process will be looked after solely not only for the private providers but as well as the public. So it's an expanded quality audit process. The Higher Education Commission will look at accreditation, and accreditation will be expanded to the public universities. So what's going to happen is that we're going to have a continuous monitoring process taking place, therefore strengthening the process of quality enhancement in this country itself. So we are moving to a higher level of quality assurance. We are actually a standard for the region, and we get consulted many times on how to actually do quality assurance within the region.
Tertiary education is free for public institutions in Mauritius. How will this change the stakes for the TEC?
It will not change what stakes for tech. If you consider quality, it doesn't matter if it's one student or 1,000 students. Quality remains where it is. We assure quality based on the infrastructure, the environment, and the program. So it doesn't matter the number of students. Free education is a very good call by the government. It ensures that every student has accessibility to actually take education in the tertiary sector. So if you come back to quality itself, we will ensure that if you go to a public institution or a private institution, they meet world-class standards.
How will free tertiary education benefit the country, and what are the advantages? Yeah.
Well, free tertiary education, if you look at the research literature itself, the research literature what clearly gives you evidence that when you have an educated population, you strengthen your economic pillars. When you strengthen that, what happens is that you got investment flowing in. Free education gives the opportunity for anyone who has not had the ability due to financial constraints to come back and do their studies. But it also gives the ability for people to upgrade and move in a direction. Now, Mauritius has the capabilities and the abilities, but once we have a development of a higher level of an educated population, I'm more or less assured that investment will come in.
Tertiary education is free in the country. What are the benefits for Mauritius?
Free education has been a very welcoming event for many people in the country, and it has allowed many families to have access to free education. We already had one institution, the University of Mauritius, that was providing free tuition fees, but then we had other public universities where tuition fees were payable. Now we have a level playing field. We have a situation where we have an array, we have 9, 10 public universities, public institutions, which are providing higher education, and all these tuition fees are free, which means we have a greater accessibility to higher education to our school leavers, irrespective of what is their social background.
The fact that there's a free education at the tertiary level, how will the universities cope with the increased demand now that it is a fact?
There are two things to talk about here. One is the increased demand. The other one is this increased demand associated with an increased enrollment? Because we have an increase, a better accessibility, more people are making a request for a seat. That's one. But at the same time, there's a policy for admission, and this is a policy set by government in 2017, in March 2017, which talks of the entry requirement of 3 A levels. So this is still there, this hasn't changed. So even if I have 20,000 students, as an example, applying, all of them will still first have to meet the entry requirement to join. If I give you an example, we had at the level of UTM this year 1,200 students who applied for a seat. But eventually we had only 610 who joined, because these were the only 610 that met the entry requirement. So it doesn't matter, the entry requirement is still there, and those who are eligible to join will be the only one joining.
The tertiary education sector has been booming in Mauritius for some years now. Does it mean that Mauritius is becoming a knowledge hub?
This knowledge hub concept, I think, might have been wrongly understood. The knowledge hub is not an event. Knowledge hub is a project, and a project, like any other project, requires time, requires planning of what was the actual situation, requires mitigation plan, requires preparation, requires a new legal framework, and then implementation of it. If you look down the line, this is exactly what has happened. There has been, like Professor Naya was saying, there has been a weeding off of all those institutions that were not up to the standards. There have been a way of assessing whether we had the right students, or whether, on the contrary, we should promote our public universities, because we're talking of public, to go out beyond our borders and do collaborative work, collaborative research with other institutions. And under this chapter, you would see that over the past many years, there have been collaboration, for example, between the University of Mauritius and our friends from University de La Réunion, University des Mascarenes with Limoges. Now UTM is having collaboration with Murdoch University. University of Mauritius also is having with Murdoch. Open University is having collaboration with Imperial College. So there is now this opening out to the world. The aim is to bring in more students, or at least to show the awareness of the courses, and at the same time bring up the quality. And along with this, along the path of Knowledge Hub, we have started doing other things. Just like when we get a student, immersion student that goes out to study somewhere, they need to have a place to live. They need to be able to work and get some pocket money. All these things have been assembled or are being assembled into this edifice. The Ministry of Labour came forward to say students now, foreign students, can work 20 hours a week. We have projects at the level of the Ministry of Education. We'll go to the Ministry of Finance for whole of residences for international students. All of these are building blocks that are coming together. And at some point of time, this was in preparation. Then came the legal framework, the Higher Education Act, that was voted in Parliament in December 2017, and that is now being implemented. And one aspect of this is this strengthening of the regulatory bodies, the Higher Education Commission on one side and the Quality Assurance Agency Authority on the other side. That's one. But then we also, under this act, creating novel things. If I want to bring in students in the act, you would see there's something called pastoral care for international students. How do we care for the students, and how do we ensure that all public universities have a duty to care for them by giving them social access, integration to what is happening, integration to the social life within the campus, the different aspects to it. And all of these brought together will create this knowledge hub. We are still on the way, but we are on the right way, I think, to reach there.
That's it from us, from the Business Connect team here today. Thank you very much for being with us. Make sure to catch us again on social networks and also on the website of the MBC. Until then, goodbye.